Okay, we have started recording. Give me 1 second here. And I'm going to start up the Facebook Live. Just takes a second. Okay. Here we are. Okay, we are live. So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's growth conversation on performing under pressure for healthcare professionals, skills that can help us flatten the anxiety curve. Today's presenters are Dr. Amy Athey and Dr. Rob Fazio, who will introduce themselves shortly. At this time, I wanted to let you know that we will record the first portion of the call today so we can reach more people who aren't on the call. During the second half of the call, we will open it up for discussion and questions, and I will turn off the recording at that time. A quick reminder that this is an educational community-based session. It is not therapy and is intended to be a discussion that has takeaways we can learn from. On holdthedoor.com, you can find additional resources. As we start, everyone will be muted and you can unmute yourself during the second half of the session. If you have any questions and want to write them down, please use the chat function in Zoom and either send them publicly or to me directly. I'm under tech support and I'll read them out for you. We will read them during the second half of the discussion. Also, set your display to speaker view in the upper right-hand side of your screen if you haven't already. So those for you joining us, welcome to the discussion, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Rob Fazio. Rob?
Thanks, Jeff. Welcome back, everybody. It's great to see some more familiar faces. Marcia, I see you out there, and it's good to see you. So today we're really delighted to have Dr. Amy Athey. I'll give her a proper introduction in a moment here. And we wanted to really focus on healthcare, although everything we talk about we think will be helpful for people regardless of your occupation. But given where we are in the crisis and, you know, in New York and Northern Jersey, we're hoping things are flattening and declining a little bit. But now we know there's being spikes in different areas. So our healthcare workers are really under a lot of constant pressure. And, you know, our thing with Hold the Door is we always start with a strength. And the strength I want to start with is in our work with hospitals, there are so many hospitals that we don't even realize that have been repurposed. So there might be nurses and doctors and PAs that are used to working on orthopedic surgery or some type of different medical ailment. And then all of a sudden they're thrown into the thrust of working with people that have COVID or people recovering from COVID. So the story of strength today is just a thank you to our healthcare professionals that are really going above and beyond in this consistent crisis, as well as we didn't plan this, but it's actually Nurses Week, so we got lucky there. So great appreciation to our nurses and all that they do, and our hope is that in some way, wherever you are, you know, listening to this, we're able to provide you some inspiration, support, and some mental skills that you can use when you're at work or you're at home. For those of you that follow Hold the Door, you'll recognize this. When the crisis started, we realized that anxiety was heightened and there is a zigzag of anxiety. So as anxiety goes up, our immune systems go down, our doctor visits go up. So what we can do to help our hospitals and doctors is to help navigate our anxiety, try to decrease our anxiety. And the way to do that is through growth resources. So on our website, we always have free downloadable resources, plus a self-awareness tool to help you understand the 8 resources that we found that buffer the negative impact of crisis and then lead to growth. And we are big on stockpiling positive experiences. So our suggestion is once a day, do one of these three things: learn, laugh, or love, just to give yourself a break from all the difficult times and the stress. So let me talk a little bit about Dr. Athey. I call her Roanoke because she's from Roanoke, Virginia, and she was the first human from Roanoke I had ever met before. Fun fact: Roanoke, Virginia is the home of Tiki and Rondé Barber, who are two former NFL players, which is cool. So Amy and I have been friends and colleagues for over about 20 years now, I would say. And Amy has a long list of credentials. She's just the newly named Associate Provost and Chief Wellness Officer at University of Arizona. She also is an expert in psychological, what do we call it, Amy? Psychological first aid? I got it, nailed it. Yeah, I should have written that one down. Psychological first aid. She does a lot of crisis response work. She also works with elite performing professionals such as athletes, and she's done a lot ranging from 9/11, Virginia Tech, Hurricane Katrina. And I'll tell you a little story about Amy. So those of you that know me and know Hold the Door, when it comes to crisis, I rarely am comfortable taking a back seat because I have such passion around what should be done, and therefore I just take charge and say stuff, which isn't always the best strategy. So right after the Virginia Tech shootings, the students were going back to school on a Tuesday, and Amy reached out to myself and one of our other colleagues and friends, Matt Bitsko, and we got together and said, hey, do you want to come down here, and we're gonna help out with the reintegration and preparing the students for what they might experience. And when I showed up on campus, I was very comfortable with taking a soldier role to Amy's leadership, and I followed her around and learned how to do proper debriefing and helping the students getting prepared for what they were about to experience. So with that, Amy, I want to welcome you and tell us where you're calling us from and how you're doing.
Thank you. This is a joy for me. So this is my love for today. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. We are in the midst of some record high heat wave right now. I think our record temp, our high temp today is supposed to be 105 degrees. So I was working from my patio, and I decided it'd probably be best to not sweat through. I would want you to think I was like really, the pressure was getting to me, right? So
that right, that'd be a bad look if you had beads of sweat running down.
Yeah, if I was really sweating. So so this is a joy for me, and whenever we can partner, I'm so happy to do so. And one of the other aspects of this in terms of the model here, when we talk about learning, I always enjoy learning from you too. And so my hope today, or my intention today, is that we can have this conversation, we can laugh, and we can share back, and that others can also maybe have a takeaway that they take from the conversation. So thank you.
That totally. And we did lose Amy temporarily to the western part of the country. However, she is a born and raised East Coaster, so that's, if you hear some banter, we're okay with it. If she makes fun of me, I'm good. So Amy, tell me a little about what you've been doing in particular to healthcare, and then we'll talk some about the sports psych stuff.
For sure. So I've, in addition to my role of supporting mental health and wellness initiatives and putting together teams on our campus to support the University of Arizona community, in the Tucson community, there were also a grassroots group that really over 60 people that have come together to get creative and innovative and figure out how we can best support the healthcare workers in our area. That organization is called HCW Hosted, so that website, hcwhosted.org. And really the mission is to be able to serve as a resource in connecting healthcare workers to housing resources if they need to self-quarantine from their home Also to provide symptom monitoring. So we have an amazing group of epidemiologists, psychologists, physicians who are assisting with symptom monitoring for the healthcare workers. And then the third component is offering mental health and wellness support. So serving as a conduit of helping if a healthcare worker is in an Airbnb or a hotel to still be able to connect. And we are providing those support meetings using principles of psychological first aid to offer that support to groups offered virtually for healthcare workers to connect. And we're excited to also look at the possibility of expanding that support and offering for the spouses or partners of the healthcare workers who have enrolled in the HCW hosted program. So that's been very fulfilling in order to try to connect and bring together a very comprehensive approach of offering support for the healthcare workers.
It's an awesome initiative, and glad that you're doing that. So for those of us who don't know, two things. One, tell us what you're seeing that are some of the struggles for healthcare workers, and then tell us a little bit about psychological first aid.
Sure. You know, when you use the term healthcare workers, it's a very diverse group. And I think the first thing is to acknowledge that given the diversity and the individuality of people's experiences, that, you know, many reactions or kind of how they're coping with this, it varies. And depending on the health system in which they're working on, it may have unique challenges and supports as well. Some of the challenge right now is our long-term care workers. Certainly in our community here, those have been, quote, the hot spots of some of the COVID cases. Certainly, I'm trying to connect them with additional resources in the community, but the common stress reactions really run the gamut, right? Anywhere from the fear and the anxiety related to questioning whether or not I would be at risk of infecting my family, right? The impact of grief and loss of losing people that they have cared for over time. Certainly depending on the availability of PPE, right? That kind of waxes and wanes, but that vulnerability and that lack of security that is impacting our healthcare workers as well. And then there's also the moral challenges of knowing that sometimes without the adequate testing and working with patients, knowing that if they leave, right, we're still not really sure. We're really excited. The University of Arizona has developed its own diagnostic test as well as its antibody test. And so we have some really promising opportunities to be able to provide antibody testing to all 60,000 of the University of Arizona faculty, staff, and students. So there are these, the evolving pieces of hope that people can ground themselves in, but it's still certainly a very challenging time. Psychological first aid is not psychological treatment, and that's usually the first thing I really want to point out to people. We offer a free psychological first aid link. It's through Coursera, which is a free online psychological first aid class right now. It's about 5 to 7 hours, and it's really meant to provide an opportunity for people to relate the challenges that perhaps this crisis is bringing to them, to be able to express maybe their reactions or even some of the kind of really specific facts of things that they're dealing with, but also to foster and identify ways that they're coping, and even perhaps to be able to share back and give others ideas. Psychological first aid can be offered in a group. It could also be offered in a one-on-one conversation. So it's really an excellent way of being able to provide kind of a sense of stability a bit and support in that conversation, and then also to be action oriented and considering what is one or two things that you could be doing to help right now.
If I remember correctly, you used to do work, was Baltimore first responders when you used to do the crisis incident debriefing? And
so I train, I'm fortunate, I trained under Dr. George Everly, who currently is on staff at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health and School of Medicine. And one of the blessings that I've taken for this is when the volunteer group HCW hosted, we were getting together and they identified, hey, it would be nice to have some type of mental health and resilience support. I reached out back to him, and I haven't talked to Dr. Everly probably in 15 years. And so for me, it was a joy being able to reconnect with him. I trained under him while I was at Loyola, but he has been a leader in disaster psychology and crisis intervention, and helped build programs out of support after Ebola and SARS and H1N1, in addition to other natural and terroristic disasters across the world. So I trained with him while I was at Loyola, and then I think you might be referring to, I worked on a mobile crisis team that was a police-based unit. Yeah, where we responded just in that Baltimore County community to any psychiatric related emergency.
One thing that I found really interesting, I'm a big fan of Adam Grant's work, so I listened to his podcast and he's got some new ones. But you know, a lot of times we go into the crisis debrief and all good intention. And it's really interesting what they're talking about is in Denver, what they're doing with the first responders is they're calling it diffusing.
Yeah.
And so the importance of having someone who's in the system. And one of the things I'm learning with the healthcare workers is I saw some people today just getting a little bit, you know, peeved and angry, like, okay, enough with like, we care for our first healthcare workers and stuff. It's like, you really don't know what's going on. And I think that's something we all have to be careful with is like, we don't know what it's like to wearing full PPE gear and being in sweat in a mask and doing a job that we didn't sign up to do. So the reason I mentioned that is it's just so important as we're all trying to help. It's like, we really don't know the experience of a police officer, fireman, or someone in healthcare right now.
Absolutely. So the diffusing model, one of the field of crisis intervention, we kind of has been an interesting one. It actually has some parallels, Rob, to sports psychology, where how sometimes we trip on ourselves along the way.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that came about was just the tripping on language. And unfortunately, along the way, the word debriefing ended up being used for a variety of different things. And unfortunately, it lost its meaning. I really, when I hear that word, I'm not always entirely sure of what that is. And so the critical incident stress management model actually has a number of different types of interventions. And the one thing I'll just say about crisis intervention is timing matters, training matters, and the type of intervention matters. And so diffusings is actually very similar to some of the psychological first aid models that we're using. And that is what we are seeing a lot used right now. And it's really meant to be able to offer the opportunity to be able to ground people with what we do know. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
What we do know, and then offer some support right now, and specific strategies of how we can help each other cope during this time.
I agree. I think that just like in every field, there becomes these turf wars, right? But the bottom line is, what do we know? We know that processing is important. We know that having good self-care and relaxation, and we know that skill building is important and making it an ongoing cycle. That's really what it comes down to. And you've got to be careful of doing too much too fast. But you know me, I like to get to the so what and what are we going to be doing, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about, in my brain, I use rhymes and letters that work because I can remember. So for me, what I'm getting from healthcare is it's fear, frustration, which then is leading to fatigue. And that's kind of what's going on for a lot of people. So given that, let's talk a little bit about some of working with elite performers and what we can do. We have a couple more slides, and I'm going to get rid of them, but don't worry about what's up there now. Tell me what you would use from your expertise to help people that are kind of going in and out of situations where there's a lot of stress.
Yeah, so I don't know if you describe it as a pet peeve. That might be a little too intense for me, but I always kind of chuckle at the word stress management, right?
Yeah.
I think of it probably more helpful right now would be this concept of energy management right now. And some of even the slide that you have up here really relates to considering the impact of the demands that we are responding to during this time, both as situations. So I'm going on shift. I have to, I've got an 8, 10, 12 shift. And so that's a situational demand. And there's going to be even micro situations within that shift. But then also to consider that then there's this long haul that we are in. And one of the unique challenges of our current crisis is that this has not been an acute episode, right? It is not a hurricane coming through town and then leaving, and now we're automatically into a recovery, quote, phase. We're in the middle of it. And there's some experts that are suggesting that we're even possibly closer to the beginning of it. And so I like to consider both the long, we're using a sport analogy. We're in the beginning of our season. We may not have even gotten to the conference schedule yet. And so I need to be able to manage my stress to meet the demands to optimally perform for perhaps this one performance. And I need to keep in mind that I've got perhaps a 30-game schedule or 55-game schedule right ahead of me. So there's two factors here, and so that's kind of the framework that I would use.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. One of the things that I kept hearing with some of the hospitals is, we're sending them back in. So they have this, for some people, traumatic experience. They're seeing people dying. They're doing things they don't know how to do, and then they need to get back right in the game and also take care of normal things that they typically would, family and things like that. So it's a constant wave, and I think it's stressful and scary. And so what this speaks to is there's two things. There's in the moment, and when you have to focus on things, and then there's out of the moment. And in the moment, the whole idea is stress can help you perform, but then if there's too much stress, it decreases. And if you don't have enough stress, you don't perform enough. So if someone gets burnt out or apathetic, there's not enough stress because they might be emotionally numb. And by the way, you don't need to get your doctorate in sports psychology. We just told you exactly what you're going to learn right there. So given that, Amy and I were talking about it, the simplification of this is, so therefore we need to have strategies that help people when they're in the hospital or when they're focusing on a task at hand, and then also when they're at home or not at the hospital, because you cannot run at that optimal level constantly and consistently. And I think that's what even people that aren't in healthcare, much different experience, but I know for myself, I started feeling that where it's like, I was like a 9 out of 10, like going after, like, we got to handle this crisis, we got to do all that. And then all of a sudden, you start to fatigue and you can't be there for other people. So it's so important to be aware of that. So I think we want to talk about here is, in no particular order, and this is where Amy and I will just kind of talk about our experience in working with athletes or healthcare. Let's talk about some practical strategies here of what people can actually do. So I'll let you go first because I'd probably take yours if I went first.
Yeah, so I like the phased approach. So you have a pregame routine here. I mean, I think before any performance, we always talk about preparation, right? None of us go into performances typically cold. Like, that's not the ideal situation. And the reality is, our healthcare workers or any of our professionals out there, it's a helpful reminder that you have been preparing, that you have the skill sets, and that you do have the team with you to be prepared. So your pregame routine, so to speak, could just be as simple as a helpful reminder of, you know what, yeah, yesterday maybe didn't go as well, but I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this. Or I even saw some, and people were kind of joking about it, but some of the TikToks even now, right? We're talking about our work wife or our work husband. I've got my people, I've got my tribe, and and just a helpful reminder going into it, that shift. I love having up here the song. I use it, that's one of my go-to interventions when I'm talking about people performing. Our minds are very active things. And sometimes our minds just really want to help us out. And without sometimes some narrow focus or just kind of putting some lines up of where our minds can go to do that, it'll get really creative. And that doesn't necessarily mean helpful. Song lyrics can be very grounding. It could just be the rhythm. It can also give that mind something to occupy itself with for you to be able to execute in the moment. And then the last piece I'll just pull from here, my 3. I see that you have the word self-statement. The analogy that I often ask athletes, they'll come in and they'll talk about what's going on. I said, well, what would you want your ideal coach to say or to do? And ideal coaches often have very good timing. They know when to talk and they know when not to talk. Ideal coaches know what kind of information to give. Sometimes it's instructional, like a very specific tactic. Sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes it's very supportive. Sometimes ideal coaches recognize if you're just kind of in that 8-year-old state and need to like put an arm around you and say, hey, it'll be better tomorrow. Well, then I'll challenge, after I hear all of the list of the ideal coach, I'll ask then, well, what about your coach? And we all have a coach. And it's that voice inside of our head, the running dialogue that sometimes we're using to help us get through a performance or help us get through that shift. And there are going to be times where you need a supportive voice. Sometimes you need an instructional voice. Sometimes you need a challenging voice. And sometimes you need that compassionate voice. And so really kind of think about what that ideal coach could be for you going into the shift.
That's so spot on. Where I think oftentimes we can be like, this is the best way I know to help people, but it's not what the person needs in that moment. So I have a tendency to go to strength and growth right away. And someone might be, all they need is a conversation. So the other day in one of my conversations, I had a list of 3 things I was going to teach this person and I was going to go. And then I could just see like they weren't having it. And we just spent the whole hour with me just listening, which by the way, is not easy for me. So, but that is what they needed in that moment. So I really like that is, realizing that the coaching or the helping can be something different and just asking the person what they need in that moment. And, you can always give the nudge along, but sometimes you might need to wait to the second conversation.
And knowing for yourself, right? Like knowing what you ask yourself, what kind of coach do I need right now? Right?
Yeah.
Do you really need somebody chewing you out on the sideline when you've had a really crappy day? No, you probably don't, right? So why would you be talking to yourself in an other way? Yeah.
I've also found, so you mentioned the song, having a guiding metaphor, I find is really helpful for people when you're trying to get them to perform, especially with this consistent crisis, right? Because it's going on a long time. So what is that guiding metaphor? Is it a bridge? Is it a sailboat? Is it like ski? It's kind of like, we're taking the mountain. Whatever your metaphor is for you, I think that becomes very powerful, and having that image, somewhere where you work, behind the desk, something you would talk about, just anchoring to that, I think could be really powerful. Because like you said, our minds will work for us or against us. The best metaphor I heard about our minds are, they're like monkeys and they just need something to grab onto. And if you don't give it a positive branch, it's going to go the other way.
Absolutely. One of the metaphors that comes to my mind is just, especially in dealing with the emotional reactions that people are having right now, is that the metaphor of the waves, right? And how we can ride the waves. And sometimes you can even see it coming, right? You can feel it coming. And what can you do to kind of help? Maybe it is reaching out to somebody else on the other surfboard and holding their hand as we ride the wave together. maybe it's taking some deep breaths because you can kind of ground yourself on your own board. But then also taking solace and taking in the calm. And because, you know, there is a rhythm sometimes to that emotion. And so knowing that it will pass, and then also kind of how you can ground yourself and ride the waves.
Yeah. I'm hesitant to bring this up, but I will, because that's what I do. So one of my things, I just saw my wife roll her eyes, now I'm in trouble. One of the things that, look, I have my own approach. My show, I do what I want, right? One of the things that really bothers me is overused cliches, because I feel like they may be helpful for the person saying them, but not necessarily the person hearing them. So when I hear constantly, and I've made the mistake, we're in this together, we're going to get through this, I'm not sure how it really feels like to the person that is waking up at 6 a.m., working to 8 p.m., not seeing their family, when I'm at home complaining because I'm working virtually, right? So I just wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, I saw it. I'm blanking on the author or the publication, but I was just reading an article about even some of the language we're using around heroes and war, like we're fighting the war together. And I think for some that may feel supportive and that may feel very, you know, part of a community. But I was reading earlier today that for some that it's missing the mark a bit.
Yeah, it's almost like we're going towards cheerleading, but there's something else needed, and that something else may be pizza or an N95 mask
or PPE.
Right. So I try to be mindful of that. One of my big pet peeves during like crisis and trauma was people would say like, you know, time heals all wounds. It's like, no, what you do with the time heals the wounds. Like time just doesn't do it on its own. Like there's got to be some activity in there doing that. All right, I'm done with that one. Sorry. So my favorite sports psych intervention is probably well, there's two I really like. The first one is just the cue words, right? Because it's so simple to have a trigger word. So you want to talk us through like what a cue word is and how someone can use that?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into anything that's demanding and performing under pressure, to really, you want to have an orientation or an intention around one thing that's 100% in your control, that given all these other things going on, that you can kind of come back to and focus. So in sport, I'll give the analogy of sport, and then I'll toss you the harder pitch to pitch for the healthcare workers. But in sport, the example is it needs to be specific. So I played basketball, and the sport would be, instead of going into the game saying, you know, I really want to you know, help be a leading scorer. I really want to shut down this girl who I'm guarding. I really would ask myself, okay, what's one thing that I can do that when I left the game, if I did that, increase the odds that those other outcomes would happen. And it really related to who I was and how I wanted to play to execute. So it might be something like quick feet or be aggressive.
Yeah.
But then to take it even further and just to make it as intensely, so I would take it further. If I was thinking of aggressive, I would have almost this mental image of what I looked like when I'm aggressive and how do I feel when I'm aggressive? What were my, you know, feet doing? How was I on defense? And so you can kind of take it to kind of a very dynamic extreme, if you will. Yeah. But it can also just be very grounding. And so when you know, shit hit the fan in the middle of the game, and it felt more scattered and we were kind of off rhythm and my coach is yelling, it could give me just one thing to focus on and to let go of so much of the other what felt chaotic in that moment. I was like, you know what, forget everything else. I'm just going to be aggressive right now. And it became a very simple focus. So I'll pitch it to you at the hospital.
Sorry, my friend Jeff Garbut's FaceTiming right now. I can't answer that. So I would say for a hospital, I like the metaphor of a stoplight. And we know that we're all going to have negative thoughts, right? So when I think of it, it's in the room, out of the room. So out of the room is when we're not actually with the patients, and out of the room is red light. You can have negative thoughts, you can let them flow. As you're walking towards the room, it's yellow light, and you start to make that shift of, okay, I need to be focused, reminding yourself what you need to do. Once you walk through that door, it's a green light, and you have a couple words like, I got this, or I'm helping, and that's all you're repeating to yourself. And that overrides some of the fear, because you can't be fearful and confident at the same time. Mm-hmm. And you have to practice it and believe it. So just constantly saying that to yourself, and it's got to be something that you pick, that you believe in, and you rehearse it, and you picture yourself going into that room. And you also think about what it's like if you are going to see someone who is dying, or someone who's in pain, or you don't know what you're doing. You keep saying that to yourself, like, I'm ready for this, I'm helping, whatever that is, and you take that shift. And then when you leave, then you can say, that was terrible, I don't know if I can do that again. And then you go through it again. Mm-hmm. That's what I got for that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about then, we've just made people spend a day when they're, going in and out of rooms, and it's constant stress. One of the most interesting things I heard from the healthcare professionals is, nurses, doctors, PAs, staff in medicine are so used to having facts and a plan based on empirical evidence. And we don't have that right now. We don't have the swarms of data that we look at. So that uncertainty breeds anxiety. And that anxiety, yes, in the moment when I'm saving someone's life, I know what to do. But then it creeps in when you're at home and I got to go back in the next day. So what are your thoughts on what people can do at home when they're not in the game, so to speak?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying, that this is that long season, right? That we have come to learn in sport the role of recovery in order to optimize performance. 10, 20, 30 years ago, you would hear about, oh, while you're sleeping, I'm at the gym, right? Sometimes you'll even hear it now. But what we've come to understand is recovery is critical to be able to have the focus, to be able to manage the emotions, to be able to make effective decisions in performance. If you're not recovered, those things can be compromised. It can be harder to do. So, I see here a couple of things on the at-home slide. Rest, the importance of sleep. Sleep has now been identified as the #1 performance enhancer. And what we also, though, know is sleep is a very sensitive system. And so under times of stress, one of the most common signs of stress is disruption in sleep. People have a harder time unwinding, falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night and having a hard time return to sleep, or even waking up, if you will, and then kind of that 3:45, 4 a.m. when you didn't really have to get up for another hour or two. What I would really encourage healthcare workers to consider, though, it's within that 24-hour time period. And so using the routines to help unwind at night are critical. So giving at least 30 minutes to start unwinding before getting into bed, being really mindful of stimulus. So having your room, if at all possible, really dark, cool, but not too cool, right? And being mindful also of the comfort that's needed. Be really mindful of the screens, right? As much as you can, if we can have a break from them 30 minutes before bed, and really only using the bed to identify I say sleep and sex. The only thing that bed needs to be. We get into this bad habit of still kind of reading through the social media when we're laying in bed before we fall asleep, or after the alarm goes off in the morning, grabbing it and laying in bed. But if you're not sleeping and it's been more than 30 minutes, you need to get out of bed. So we do a lot with high performers around active recovery, and sleep is that #1. You can use active stress management or relaxation techniques for other active recovery strategies, and then even napping trying to catch a nap to kind of bolster up some of that sleep and recovery.
And Amy, so I don't have any expertise in sleep other than I need 10 hours of it. What are there any resources or websites that people can go to learn about sleep hygiene?
Yeah, so actually Dr. Michael Granier at the University of Arizona and I, NCAA, we have 2 grants funded, one in 2016 and one in 2018, that we built a sleep wellness program called Project Rest. And so we have some resources available. You know what, Rob, what I'll do is I'll just make sure you have that link if you want to share that with
And what's if they were to Google, like what website, what would they Google? To
I had it. I had it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Project Rest.
Okay.
R-E-S-T.
Project Rest, Amy Athey, and they'll find it, I'm sure. Right?
Yeah, okay. They'll find it. But I'll make sure we have a website where actually people can get the workbook and the curriculum if they're interested. You know, the one thing I would share is, again, to normalize some of the sleep difficulties during a time like this, but also to remind people that if this is something they've been dealing with, especially before this crisis, that there are treatment providers, behavioral health specialists out there who can help. And especially for something like insomnia, which is very common, if that's something they've been dealing with, really to reach out for additional help with that, because there are not, and actually the frontline treatment for that is not medication, but there is some support for that too.
And the only other I want to hit on here at home is, although it takes time, but finding time to reconnect to something you enjoy, I think is critical, because I think our minds and bodies need a rest. And that might be as simple as you call one of your favorite friends that make you laugh, or you watch a funny show, but something that you just outright enjoy, I think is important. And some of the other things you can do, both like humor. I'm a big advocate for humor. There's so much research around humor preventing burnout, increasing productivity. Actually, in the leadership world, there's research on bosses that actually have a good sense of humor make more money. So if you're not funny, it's still okay, as long as you welcome an environment where there is some humor. I think that's really important for people to just have some of those positive experiences. And you know, it's all about like a bank account. If you build up your capital of positive experiences and things that aren't stressful, we can counteract some of all these stressful experiences that we know we're going to have.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Just a quick plug for 2 weeks from now, we have a clinical psychologist who specializes in resilience, trauma, and also storytelling. So that'll be in 2 weeks from now. We'll get that info out to you. But I'm going to stop the share here, because then people can have a better view. Amy, anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about or suggest or recommend to people?
You know, I think the role of self-compassion, I think, is critical right now. And whether that is that your role as a healthcare worker, I heard you talk about the shift, right? That the protocols aren't able to be executed like they once were because of the lack of data to run the protocols, right? And then even for people in other occupations, right? This idea of productivity and what that looks right now. I've shared, Rob, your concept about integrating like that life work experience at home now. And so really coming to a point of just acknowledging, hey, these are not normal times. And these reactions that I'm having today, which may feel very different than I had yesterday, and tomorrow may feel very different, are all very normal. And in keeping in mind that, you know, I use the phrase a lot in crisis, these are normal reactions to abnormal events. We're not going crazy. It's, you know, if I happen to snack more during the day? Yeah, okay, so I snacked more today, you know? But how can I get up tomorrow and not beat myself up about that? And how we can connect and still be mindful of, you know, trying again, and to see something else that could help us in the next day. So.
Yeah, if I had to categorize it, it'd be like, in these times, give yourself a break and don't break, right? Meaning like, don't let yourself break down, and meaning that like it's going to break you. People I talk to on a daily basis, the word guilt comes up. I feel guilty how much screen time my kid does. I feel guilty I can't help them with the homework. I feel bad and guilty like that. And one of my friends once told me, guilt's like being in a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but gets you nowhere. And so we just have to realize that these are completely abnormal, different times, and the definition of productivity is much different now, and we're not going to be able to do what we've been doing before, and that's okay. I think that everyone is feeling that consistent stress and anxiety, and the best thing we can do is try to, as a community, support each other and talk through that. I'm also big on the whole, you know, become an expert in something. If you're like, so for me, I was very anxious as a kid and overweight and didn't have a lot of confidence. So I was like, you know what? I want to learn about confidence and I want to learn about health, right? And clearly this is overcorrection, but you get the point, right? So, well, anything else, Amy, before we open it up and see if people want to chat with us a little bit?
You know, the only thing I will share, and I share this actually with everyone when I reflect on you, the work of Hold the Door, not just the model, but the takeaways, is that the role of connection and support. And there are days where that feels especially challenging for me, to do it over this virtual landscape that we have now. Although when I take a step back and reflect on what's fueling me right now, it really has been around opportunities like this, right? Like, Rob, we don't need a pandemic, right? To have this. Or I mentioned Dr. Everly, like how meaningful that was to connect with him. And I had an opportunity to be a guest speaker in a business class, right? To be able to connect with students in a way that is not usual part of my, you know, day-to-day job now, and how fueling and those connections have been for me. So even though they're not all that they could be with the virtual life we're interacting on right now, they still have brought a lot of meaning and fulfillment for me. So I would encourage to keep connecting with people.
Yeah, everyone stays connected. That's right. Yeah. All right, let's Jeff, let's open it up and see if there's any questions, thoughts, or comments. Hi, Reese. She's having a